Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess Channel and welcome back to the TCEC Season 22 Premier Division. So after many rounds the result is really wild. The Dragon engine has now a whole point more than the Stockfish engine, which is really incredible, and in one particular moment the Stockfish engine took the lead in the super event, and I thought this is probably it. Finally Stockfish took the lead, and I don't think that Stockfish will lose its lead again, but again Stockfish played too many draws, although Stockfish is the only agent that didn't lose the game so far. But again, this draw costed now the Stockfish engine the lead, and Dragon played simply great chess, won many games, won many attractive games, and is, as I said, simply in the lead. And we'll see now what will happen. Still, I don't want to predict anything. We'll see in a potential super final. Really a beautiful game between Stockfish and Dragon, but as I said, that so far in this Premier Division the Dragon engine is in the lead, which really never happened before. It was a pure domination by the Stockfish engine before, also in this previous season. So as I said, it's really a beautiful tournament so far. So let's check out now, again as usual, one game by the leader, which is the Dragon engine, and I sorted out this game against Stoofvlees. It's, I think, really a beautiful game that shows that one passive move in the opening can cost you the whole game. I think I've sorted out a really important moment in the opening stage that costed here Stoofvlees the game, and the Dragon engine played here really beautiful strategical chess, never allowed here black to come into the game, pointed also some weaknesses in the position, directed against these weaknesses, included all of the pieces into the attack, played really beautiful pawn breaks for immortal tactics. So in my opinion, it was also one of the best games so far of this TCEC Season 22 competition. Be prepared. In my opinion, this is simply beautiful chess that the Dragon engine pulled off here. So let's check out now the game. Here knight to f3 was played by Dragon, knight to f6 by Stoofvlees. We have d4, e6, and after move e3 we have here sort of Queen's Indian set up by both engines. After move b6 we have now c4, and now after the game bishop to b7 we have now the Queen's Indian defense with the normal setup. Here we want, of course, now to be flexible here from black's perspective. We can still break through with the move d5. We can also compete here with the moves c5. The bishop is active, the knight is on a good square, the knight will come also maybe to c6. So it's a good setup here for black. It's sort of a classical setup where you don't have weaknesses immediately, then you play simply your pieces on the best square. So that's why in my opinion really a solid opening. So here after move bishop to d3 was played by the Dragon engine. We have bishop to e7, castling, kingside castling, also a knight to c3, and now c5. You have to break, of course, in the center. You cannot tolerate your opponent's centralized position, so that's why c5 or maybe even d5 are now really good moves here for black. So okay, here the c5 was still the prearranged line. We have now b3. If you want to take, of course, now maybe this was sort of an idea, because when you have some struggles in the center, when you have a collision in the center, one of the good ways is maybe to release the pressure a little bit, to trade off the pawns, to simplify the game, because then the game is not so complicated. Although maybe in this particular scenario white could maybe take with e takes d5, but now with e takes d4 pattern and then with d5 you would still break white center, and I really like this idea. Maybe something like rook to e1 can be played, and now you still can simplify the game further with the takes c4. Then after b takes c4 white could have maybe the so-called hanging pawn structure, but I think it's playable also for black, because we can still attack it with knight to c6, maybe something like queen to c7, rook to d1, rook to d8, rook to c8, maybe getting the rooks on both of these files, and maybe attack the pawn on c4 and d4. So as I said, a clarification idea is a normal idea when you have here the pawn collisions, but after move b3 the prearranged line was now the move d6, and that's exactly the moment that I wanted to sort out here. Here the Stoofvlees engine played here really a passive move d6. The Stoofvlees engine didn't battle here for the center, so you can also of course do it by playing maybe here the move d5 immediately. You don't have to play maybe this line that we have seen before with this idea c takes d4. So d5 is, in my opinion, also perfectly fine. But now for move d6 Dragon plays a beautiful move d5, and you see now what happens if you don't battle for the center. d5 is a beautiful tactical idea, because here after e takes d5 Stoofvlees took, of course, the centralized pawn. Now after move c takes d5, the problem for black here is that you cannot take. Knight takes d5 is here not an option because of knight takes d5, bishop to d5, and after bishop to h7 you take, and now here we have no new strategical weakness, which is now the so so-called backward pawn. You see now it's a huge positional problem. The bishop is always stuck a little bit here to the defense. You cannot develop your bishop here, maybe to f6. You would love, of course, to do that, but now with rook to d1, the d6 pawn is hanging. Still, you have to make a reaction first of all. The rook on a8 is hanging, so maybe you would be forced to play something like knight to d7. We're playing normal development now. Even if you tried something like knight to f6 to kick away the queen, maybe to push the pawn further with the move d5, this is not possible because I like this line. Bishop to f6, bishop to f6, and now after rook to d1, still we're playing such a beautiful blockade. And I think in the near future we can also cement our knight, maybe something like e4, and then maybe search for some activity, something like knight to d2, knight to c4, knight to e3, and then if we cement the knight on d5 supported by the pawn on e4, this would be really the so-called octopus knight, which couldn't be kicked away by any minor piece of blacks. It would be really a monstrous centralized knight that would be simply the best piece on the board. So as I said, even in this scenario you have the bishop, but the bishop is not doing anything. The bishop is aiming into air, and you don't want to have a bishop like this. So that's why even in this scenario, as I said, even if you take knight takes d5, you keep a really big hole here around the square d5, but also the backward pawn on d6 is a huge strategical problem. So after move c takes d5, here we have knight to d7 played by Stoofvlees, and now of course normal development with bishop to b2, a6, preparing now b5. We have reached now similar pawn structure, not the same, but like in the Benoni structure when you have maybe d6 c5, but in the Benoni many times the dark square bishop is developed on this diagonal, then this b5, b4, c4, or maybe a5, a4, this flank attack on the queen side, because we have to notice that black has here a 3 versus 2 pawn majority. A flank attack makes here really sense for black, and with the support of the bishop it would be, I think, a beautiful attack. But in this particular position, of course, the bishop is not good. The bishop on e7 is simply stuck here and blocked out by its own pawns, and if you want to reroute the bishop, you need like 1, 2, maybe here to f8, then maybe to play g6, then bishop to g7. So you need 4 moves just in order to improve your bishop. It's simply too slow. Meanwhile, white is doing something, you know. You should count your improvement, because as I said, in 4 moves, believe me or not, white will probably find a way maybe to break through, maybe with e4, e5 and similar stuff. So as I said, this remaneuver of the bishop on e7 is simply too slow in order to get the bishop into the game. So here queen to c2 was played by the dragon. We have a rook to e8. Even if you try something like b5 to finally attack the queen side, I don't like this immediate attack because you don't have support. As I said, you would love to have some kind of a piece that attacks the position further, because now we can simply play rook from a to d1, and again, if you play even something like, I don't know, knight to b4 attacking the knight on c3, it doesn't even matter, because still we can play knight to e2 or maybe knight to a4. We can escape. Let's play this line, knight to e2, and you think you could maybe take out the bishop, pardon me, the pawn here with the bishop, but now after knight to d5, of course, again the pawn on h7 is hanging. Even if you try with bishop to d5, the same thing will happen, because here we can take bishop to h7, and now if we take with the knight, you see the knight gets deflected from the defense of the bishop, and now we can play rook to d5, and we have reached now a similar position like before, not the same, but again with same strategical weaknesses as we said, with the weak square on d5, but also with the weak pawn on d6. So I think here white is much better. So even if you don't react, if you play something like king to h8, if you don't want to play the game like this, then still we have this one, knight to g5. The problem is now a potential g6 is not possible to lock the bishop. Then we can simply take rook takes d5, and you see now here the bishop is controlling the knight cannot take the rook, the knight cannot also take the bishop. Even if you try something else, I don't know, let's see, maybe you try something like knight to g4, still of course here we see bishop on the d5 is hanging, so you cannot leave here with the knight to protect. So this is simply not working. Even if you try knight to e5 to maybe lock the dark square diagonal. Still, of course, knight to f4. You see now the bishop is hanging here. Even if you retreat with the bishop, then the d file is vulnerable here. Bishop to e5 you cannot take because of this beautiful attack on the d file. So these are really wild tactics, but that's exactly how you should play chess. Here I have removed queen to c2, and as I said, even if you try b5, then rook to d1, rook to e1. This is really beautiful setup. The setup that the dragon played here, I think, shows really good attacking formations. And when you have good attacking formations, then you have also good tactics. So that's why I really loved here dragon's approach. After move queen to c2, in my opinion, as I said, the move b5 is simply too rush. So that's why rook to e8, we have rook to d1, knight to f8, and now finally e4. Now, of course, the h7 tactic is not working because the knight is also controlling now the square. So now finally e4, and of course the idea is a breakthrough with the move e5. So we have now knight to g6, knight to e2, we have bishop to c8, and now a beautiful prophylactic move here by dragon h3. So this move h3 is not allowing here, I think, black to breathe, because this is really paralyzing move. Although in the beginning it seems like a slightly passive move, but prophylaxis is also very important in chess, because now this bishop, as I said, cannot come into the game. You would love, of course, to play somewhere with this like bishop, but now all of the squares are taken. We have seen also on this diagonal it was taken, and we have discussed this move b4 or b5 already, because it's simply not working immediately. So here in the continuation, what the Stoofvlees engine had in mind is here to play sort of a blockade against this potential e5 move, because you want to have a really grip around the square and never ever allow white to break through with this move. So that's why knight to d7 is a preparation to build a blockade. So we have knight to g3, we have b5 finally expanding on the queen side, but as I said, you don't have progress. The c4 is very well protected. If you play b4, if you rush into the attack, then you have sort of a weak square that can be always blocked out with potential bishop to c4 move. So here in the continuation, we have rook to e1, bishop to f6. So here it's a perfect control around the square e5, and you can guess what the dragon engine does. Although you see we have here once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times protection of the e5 square. You can guess what the dragon engine plays. The dragon plays here simply e5 immediately. Really beautiful tactical shot. Of course, if you take knight from g to e5, then you lose again this tactic with the move bishop to h7, and then the king is vulnerable to some dangerous attacks. So that's why we have here knight from d to e5, knight to e5, bishop to e5, and here bishop takes g6 first. Even if you tried here something like h takes g6, that wasn't the line in this particular game. Stoofvlees tried bishop takes b2, but even if you try h takes g6, then we take bishop to e5, rook to e5, rook takes e5, d takes e5, and now queen to c5. And this pawn is marching. Again, this bishop is not so good. It doesn't have good squares. Even if you develop it maybe here to this one, to the square b7, then we just push it. It doesn't matter. And even if you, I don't know, attack the queen, then still also this pawn is saying we can push d7, then probably also maybe some ideas around the square e8 are working. We can also maybe search for new opportunities, knight to e2, I don't know, maybe knight to f4, h4, h5 maybe, and I'm not sure, but as I said, this pass pawn on the d file is simply too much to handle here for black. So that's why after move bishop to e5, we had this continuation, bishop to g6, and here Stoofvlees took the bishop on b2. Didn't take here this one, but it allows now again a new check here by dragon. We have king to h8, and now after bishop to b2, here finally king takes h7, and now rook to e8. We have queen to e8, queen to d2, trying to get the queen into the game. We have queen to d8, rook to e1. Very important to get use of the only open file. This is crucial now, because who's faster on the attack on the only open file will probably win the game. Although the material is equal, we have 6 pawns for both sides, but the activity of white's pieces is simply much better. And we have also to notice that the king on h7 is vulnerable a little bit to white's attack. So we have now bishop to d7. It's okay, it develops somewhere the bishop, but we have to agree, I think, that this bishop on d7 is not the optimal piece. So we have now queen to f4. We have now queen to f6. Even if you try to, I don't know, maybe protect the d6 pawn with the move queen to c7, then of course with this idea the rook will come into the game. You lose also the f7, so you cannot really protect everything. So that's why queen to f6 solves a little bit the problems around the square d6, but also around the square f7. Here the dragon engine simply trades off the queens after g takes f6. Now knight to e4, and you see both of these pawns are hanging. You cannot really protect both of them. Also rook to e7 I think is also here working for white. So after move g takes f6, knight to e4, we had a rook to d8, we have king to f1, pardon me, king to g6, and now of course knight takes d6. We have bishop to f5, knight to f5, king to f5, and now rook to d1. Very important move, creating now this so-called supported pass pawn. We have now applied this so-called Tarrasch rule. We're bringing the rook behind the pawn, and now in one particular moment the problem for black is here. Okay, you will catch this pawn, but even if you catch it by attacking the pawn with the king and the rook, this is now a distant pass pawn, so the position is simply too stretched. Even if the king comes to the d file, then we just pushed the h5 pawn, and there's nothing that can be done. This is now completely winning endgame here for white. So king to e5, you see d6, we have f5. Now drag is simply pushing the pawn further. We have king to e6, king to e2, takes, and now king to f3. Very important, of course, to centralize your king, because that king has to be now used, of course, in an endgame. King to c6, h4. You see how the position gets stretched. King to d5, king to f4. We have c4, b takes c4, b takes c4, and now simply pushing the pawn further. So even if you try to push it immediately, then of course we can play a little bit with our king to e3, and now you could play maybe king to c4. But the problem is now you cannot use this square in order to make some kind of a progress. We just push the pawn further. Even if you try this one, then of course we can still catch the pawn. So now the pawn here on a2 is very important, because it's not allowing here the king to come on this very important square. So that's not working. So after b takes c4 and h5, here king to e6 has to be played. Really beautiful endgame technique here by the dragon engine. Now f3, c3 doesn't matter, king to e3. Now we just push further, and now g4, f takes g4, f takes g4. We have f5, g takes f5, king takes h5, king to c3, and in this position the Stoofvlees engine resigning. What's the point? Let's see the possible continuation. Black has to play, of course, king to g5. We just push further, and now the king is simply too far away. We just play this opposition. We're not allowing this king to come into the game. Even if you try this way, we just again play this opposition. Then if the king tries to go backwards, then we just push the pawn, and you see still black doesn't have time to catch the pawn. We just push the pawn further, promote to queen, and it's game over. So really beautiful game, I think it was. Maybe this wasn't sort of a game in which we saw brutal queen sacrifice, rook sacrifice, but you saw how really, I think in the beginning, this move d6 is causing really some weaknesses in the position. With the move d5, we're creating space advantages. You see also the importance of space in chess. After move d5, all of these pieces are really too passive in my opinion. d5, we have seen e takes d5, and in one particular moment just here e4, and we have now a dominant position. What we want to do, of course, is further make progress with the move e5. I think many of us have reached maybe similar position and didn't know what to do. I had many times this kind of position, sort of a Benoni structure, where I didn't feel well, especially because of this bishop on d3, which was also a little bit paralyzed. So now in this game, I think here the dragon engine shows how to attack these types of structures, and I really enjoyed this game. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game like I did. If you want to see also brilliant positional and attacking games like this, check out my commented chess games played by computer series, with some more games played by the Dragon, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, Stockfish, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.